from an undisclosed location somewhere in the northern hemisphere, waiting out the alien apocalypse. He is armed with a machete and a microphone. This is the Alien Outpost. Are you ready?
This is a treat, an honor, and a privilege. I've been wanting to have this guy on forever. He is the freaking legend. He is the guy that, I'm telling you, he's everywhere. Ancient Aliens. And I just found out he's a Freemason, but no, he's not really a Freemason. He's not a Freemason. He's not a Freemason. There's a huge story behind that.
Yeah,
but
I told it before. So.
Anyways, welcome to the show, Mike. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing good, Michael. I'm having a good time. It's nice and warm up here without that New Orleans humidity up in Seattle, so I'm good.
Oh man, I tell you what, I work outside, and yes, I don't do this full time, not yet, but I work actually in a paper mill. I don't agree with that ancient dinosaur type of technology, but it does pay the bills, you know.
It does, yeah.
And it's rough, it's brutal though. But so we're going to talk a little bit of a few things. I want to try to pick your brain as much as I can within the next hour. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Okay, so you have one of your recent books, Ancient Aliens and JFK.
Right.
There it is, baby. And I'm going to give links in the description for everybody to check out his research and his books and support it. But what led you down the road to, because you've written about the moon, the Mars, and pretty much everything when it comes to like anomalies when it comes to Mars, the moon, and other conspiracies in general. What chain of events led you to write Ancient Aliens and JFK, the race to the moon, and the Kennedy assassination? One hell of a title, Mike.
Well, you know, my publisher is David Hatcher Childress, and he always makes me put these long, extended subtitles on. I personally don't like to do that. I just think Ancient Aliens and JFK says it all, right? But publishers are weird like that. So really, it sprang out of my last book, Hidden Agenda, which is actually called Hidden Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program. But it sprang out of that because I did some Kennedy stuff in there. And basically, it was just talking about, you know, how the Secret Space Program had gotten started, if it was a real thing, and was there technology that you could trace back and say, okay, yeah, they could have developed flying saucer technology back in the 50s or 60s. And the answer, conclusion I came to was yes. And then also that Kennedy had tried to dig into this and was stonewalled. Well, that was kind of my statement on everything. And then along comes, you know, October of 2017, and Trump releases 3,000 or 4,000 new JFK assassination documents. And it's weird because, like, I have this very specific JFK assassination theory. It's mine. It's not really anybody else's. Richard Hoagland's kind of picked at the, you know, around the edges of it. But this is really my theory about who did it, who was involved, why they did it, what the evidence is that proves it, and why Kennedy was really knocked off. And this basically, these new documents confirmed my theory, not anybody else's, not any of the famous, not Jim Garrison, not Oliver Stone, not anybody else, but mine. And I was like, holy, can I swear on this?
Yes, go ahead.
Holy fuck, I said to myself, or holy shit.
You're my style, man.
I got to do a JFK book. And then it was really interesting because I found out a whole bunch more about JFK and his involvement with UFOs. I looked at, I found a couple things that Michael Salla had written up, and I was like, yeah, this all fits together. Now, his take is a little different than mine, but I think mine's right. So, so basically I felt like, also it was people like Salla. They keep saying that Kennedy was killed because he was gonna tell the public about UFOs or aliens or the Greys, and that may partially be true, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was because he was going to share the Apollo program with the Russians. That's why they killed him. Not aliens. I mean, granted, he knew that there was alien technology on the moon. He knew what we were going to find, and the dark forces, the MJ-12 types, were not going to let him give those discoveries and share them with the Soviet Union. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's the reason they knocked him off, and so I said, I got to do this. So I talked Childress into it and started doing my research and banged it out in about 3 months. So
sweet. But within the next hour, you know, I do try to limit my shows between 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes because people don't have time for 2 to 3 hour.
No.
People have lives, So that's
Right.
the reason why I may be bouncing a little bit here and there, back and forth,
Sure.
because I want to try to pick your brain, like I said, as much as I can with the next
Mm-hmm.
hour. But when it comes to, I guess, the Cold War, now, do you think that was one thing, the reason why JFK was this, or hold on, no, the true nature of the Cold War possibly be because not necessarily nukes or, like I guess a macho man, just back and forth deal between two nations, but maybe it was a race between alien technology.
Well, no, I don't really think that, honestly. I think there was definitely competition between the two countries, between the Soviet Union and the United States. There was a competition between philosophies. These things fed into it. I think certain people within the intelligence, military intelligence complex, and military industrial complex saw how they could use this to their advantage and get money and, build a lot of stuff. And it definitely was a faction in the intelligence agencies, the alphabet soup agencies, that were working on German technology that they had recovered, which I think was based on alien technology, and also alien technology they had recovered from Roswell. But I don't think that was the motivation behind the Cold War. I think it was a genuine competition between the two nations, and it almost got out of hand in the Cuban Missile Crisis, obviously, which I do cover in the book. And I think when Kennedy said, let's put a stop to all this, let's cut off the head of, the Gorgon, that I think that was what made him a target. And so, I don't think it was it was fake. I think it was genuinely a real thing that was going on.
So,
but it was human affairs, it wasn't alien
exactly.
affairs. The Cold War itself was not about aliens. It was the affairs of man.
And I'm going to give a link to your lecture. I believe it was the Life Expo or something like that. You posted it on Facebook, but it was a really good lecture. I'll give the link in the description below. Everybody needs to check that out. But within that
at the New Living Expo,
the New Living Expo, that's it.
Yeah,
New Living Expo.
That's a good one. That was the first time I gave the Ancient Aliens JFK presentation, and I think it's a really good one too.
That was a badass presentation, man. That's where a lot of my notes actually came from. Because
a lot of people liked it. Yeah,
dude, it was good. It was really good. And with that's where a lot of these questions actually came from when I was watching it. I was getting some notes down for this evening. And what exactly, I guess, was the message that JFK was trying to send during his April 27th, 1961 speech, where he's talking about secrecy, secret society, secret oaths? And do you think that's what maybe eventually led to his death?
Yeah, I do. And he was basically saying, I'm going to war with you fuckers. Okay, that's what he was saying. And, he felt very strongly that people could handle the truth and that they deserved to know the truth about many things. And one of those things was aliens. I mean, it's clearly established that through documents that have been released, that he knew something about the alien presence before he was ever president. So he was signaling his intention to those secret societies and secret organizations, the extra constitutional organizations like MJ-12, like what we call the deep state today. He was laying down the law. He was saying, I am coming after you in the same way that President Trump did. I mean, he talked about draining the swamp. That speech, the president and the press, it was JFK's drain the swamp moment, Mm-hmm. And he was asking at that time, the press, who were still relatively free back then, to help him, to assist him in getting the truth out on these things. And that made him a target. And I think they tolerated him for as long as they could. But I think when he actually began to take action to open up an office to connect the U.S. space program and the Soviet space program, that was it. That was when they decided they were going to get him, because 10 days later, they blew his head off in Dallas.
Now, who was feeding him, Mike, this information? Because it seemed like he was very interested in UFOs, ETs, because it's obvious that, of course, he was wanting to go to the moon, and his interest was huge in this. Now, I think there was some shadow figure, kind of feeding him some information, kind of getting him up to speed on this. Now, who do you think that shadow person is?
Well, primarily, as I put in the book, it's James Forrestal. James Forrestal was a very famous naval officer and Secretary of the Navy during World War II. He became the first American Secretary of Defense. And after the war, he was friends with the Kennedy family. Joe Kennedy Sr. was one of the richest men in the world, if not the richest man in the world. And I think that those two were the one that was where his connection was. So, to my mind, that's the guy that he got the initial information from. Now, hang on.
I got a little killer too. It sounds exactly like my killer. But we have Mike Bara. This is, I'm telling you, I've been waiting to have this man on forever. And it sounds like he's got a little friend back there that wants to join the conversation. Maybe I can ask his little friend some personal questions myself about ETs and aliens and UFOs. But
okay,
Mike
so
Bara,
where I was. So it was James Forrestal. I mean, after the war, Kennedy had been discharged from the Navy. He had been injured in the PT-109 incident, and he'd recuperated from that. And by the way, he recuperated from that in a hospital in Arizona, a naval hospital, where the mother of a future president of the United States worked as a nurse. So that's really pretty interesting to my mind, but that's another conversation. Anyway, he had recovered, and he ended up in post-war Germany. He ended up with Forrestal touring around Berlin. This is before even the Japanese had surrendered. So he's touring Berlin, and they went to an area called Berchtesgaden, which was Hitler's headquarters, his home away from home in the Nazi Empire. And very near that, about an hour away in an area called Silesia, is what was basically called a rubber plant, but turned out to be probably where the Germans had their secret high-level technology physics research going on, where the Nazi bell was tested and the test rig is. And I think they got in their cars and drove there and went there. And I think that was probably their first taste of what the Germans had. So, to my mind, it was Forrestal. Now, Forrestal was murdered in 1949. There's a bunch of information on that. There's a chapter on that in the book. And killed by MJ-12. He was a member of MJ-12, but he, like Kennedy, felt that people deserved to know the truth, and that made him a target. They set him up. All kinds of
quick question. I don't mean to interrupt, but yes or no? Do you think he was murdered?
Oh yeah. I think it's clear that
there is no strange coincidences in this. Like no. This is he obviously. A man of his stature is just going to kill himself. He hung himself out of what. I guess briefly explain to the audience what happened.
Well, he basically what happened is that the newspaper started publishing a bunch of articles attacking him, basically saying he was mentally unstable because he had protested to MJ-12 that we got to tell people the truth, and they said he was mentally unstable. The next thing you know, he's hospitalized. They pumped him full of drugs, committed him against his will, and then a few days later threw him out of a 16-story window. The problem is, I don't think a guy can easily throw himself out of a 16-story window with his own pajama drawstring around his neck. And that was in the initial police report of how the body was found. So bottom line is he was murdered. He was silenced by MJ-12. And Kennedy kept this in his mind. I mean, there's a really poignant picture in the book where President Kennedy... Now I've got a cat throwing up over in the corner. Okay, great.
I love it, Mike. I'm telling you.
It's classic. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's more of a hairball. Anyway.
I love it. This is why I've been wanting to have you on, man, because I'm telling you.
You're getting live action here.
Exactly.
And then, so Kennedy, in 1963, on Memorial Day, Kennedy went and gave a speech at Arlington National Cemetery. And then he took 45 minutes out of his schedule to go visit one grave at the cemetery, and that grave was the grave of James Forrestal. And there's a very poignant picture in there of him standing at the grave with his head bowed, and he was saying, I am in solidarity with you. And I don't think there's any question about that. So I would say Forrestal was his main source, although I think he had other sources later, which I do talk about in the book as well.
Do you mind if I show some of these pictures from your lecture within? Yep. Because within this interview, I'm going to make several small interviews, like of 2 to 5 minutes of whatever, like of you discussing that James Forrestal, But
sure.
Anyways, now one where I am going to make a little small video, and I sent it to you earlier, is with you within that lecture. You talked about Clinton being the illegitimate bastard son of JFK. Now, I thought that was awesome. Because here's my tinfoil hat coming on now, and I actually got one right here. My little alien friend. His name's Jim, after the late Jim Mars.
Yeah.
But so tell me, what led you down to thinking that, and I guess also, and then tell me what you thought about that video that I sent you.
I didn't have a chance to watch it yet. I'm sorry. I didn't realize what it was, so I've got to apologize for that. There's a guy named Danny Williams, who's black kid or half black, who says his mother told him his father was Bill Clinton. And he looks exactly like a black Bill Clinton. So, and she knew Bill Clinton, all this stuff. So this is something that runs in the family. The Kennedys are known to have had probably illegitimate children. And there was a big argument over whether Joe Kennedy or JFK was Bill Clinton's father. But as it turns out, Bill Clinton's mother was a nurse at the hospital where JFK was recuperating from some back surgeries that he had. He had a lot of back surgeries because he had pain from his war wounds in 1946. And it was Hot Springs, Arkansas. And then she later moved to Hot Springs, Arizona. She later moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is really weird. And exactly 9 months after she was in JFK's circle of influence there at the hospital, she gave birth to William Jefferson Clinton. Now, okay, fine. These things happen. I guess it's possible, but what's the proof? Well, when Bill Clinton was 14, he went to the White House as part of a group of students.
That was the video that's the video I sent you right there.
And they all got there and they got to meet the president of the United States, and the only one that JFK shook hands with, to my knowledge, was William Jefferson Clinton, who would later become president of the United States. That was the only one he shook hands with. It was the only one where there's a photograph of him shaking hands with one of the students, and that guy just happens to be president, 30 years later. Give me a break. It's just that's the way these things are done. And again, that's why Ken Starr wanted to get the blue dress, the Monica Lewinsky blue dress with the jizz stain on it, because he wanted to do DNA testing and find out whether Bill Clinton was an illegitimate Rockefeller or an illegitimate Kennedy. And I think we probably have our answer to that.
And Clinton said within that video, I'm sure, I'm assuming, since you pretty much stated everything you already knew of him going to the White House, you've seen that video before. But that's the video I sent you. And Clinton was like, I'm never going to wash this hand,
yeah, exactly.
But
it was my dad's hand. So it's funny, I think that Danny Williams deserves the same acknowledgement from his dad that JFK gave to Bill Clinton.
So, all right, we're going to move on a little bit more. Now, how come you stated this within the lecture also? How come there aren't any pictures of Neil Armstrong on the moon? Because every picture of Buzz Aldrin, or every picture seems to be of Buzz Aldrin. And it doesn't make any sense to me, Mike, because he was the second man that stepped foot on the moon. And you made a really good point. I'm telling you, man, your lectures are spot on, dude.
Well, first of all, the main reason is there was only one camera. There was only one handheld camera, and Neil Armstrong had it. And he had it strapped to his chest. And he's the one who took the pictures. But why would he be the guy? Well, I think Neil Armstrong, the reason he went out first is because his job was to photographically document the first Scottish Rite Freemason to walk on the surface of the moon. And that was Buzz Aldrin. And that's the reason why all these iconic pictures are Buzz. People also don't know that Buzz Aldrin took a Masonic ceremonial flag with him, or apron, to the moon and performed Masonic ceremony in the lunar module before they went out on their first spacewalk, with wine and chalices and bread and all this stuff, which is actually an offering to the Egyptian god Osiris. It's not a communion ceremony, as Buzz has claimed over the years. So there's a lot of Masonic symbolism in what went on Apollo 11, and that was the primary reason. There is, I think, one shot of Neil Armstrong's legs underneath the LEM. But that's it. There were every other picture, all those iconic Apollo 11 pictures, man on the moon, it's all Buzz Aldrin, not Neil Armstrong, because he was really the important one.
Now, how come we haven't had any new means of transport technology to travel into space, and we still rely, Mike, on this 1960s era rocket technology? what the hell is going on here, man? Because it seems like I believe we have advanced technology that's out there, but it's being kept from the public eye. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Well, I think that the what you just mentioned, which I brought up in Hidden Agenda, is the reason why. Because if you look at the growth of the speed of transportation on it, if you plot it on a curve, it goes basically straight up from about 1835, when you had the steam locomotive, to the time you have the rocket. I mean, basically, it just goes straight up, and then all of a sudden, it just goes flat. It just goes straight across, dead flat since 1960. Since the invention of the chemical rocket, we've had no new advancements in transportation, and that is impossible. When you have a trend curve like that, you develop new technologies. And as I dug into it, when I went back and did the research for Hidden Agenda, when I dug into it, it's like, yeah, there was research being done. There was all kinds of research being done into anti-gravity by the Germans, by the Americans, by people like T. Townsend Brown, who created these flying disc-shaped objects that could travel theoretically faster than light. And I think we did make a discovery, but after he made a presentation to the intelligence agencies in the Navy in 1958, they cut it all off. They stopped all anti-gravity research. They banned papers from any of the scientific publications. And ever since then, we've been stuck with chemical rockets, which, don't work so well as the crews of the Challenger and the Columbia can tell you.
And it's pretty much
the Challenger. I don't know. The Challenger people might still be alive. I mean,
they may be.
This JFK Jr. thing freaked me out, and then there's this other stuff about there's people that look exactly like the Challenger astronauts. Older versions that even though some of them have the same names, and they're just living their lives, and I'm like, what? So something weird's going on.
But why did and I would like to stay on that topic too, but I just, like I said, I want to try to pick your brain as much as I can. But why did Neil Armstrong seem to, when he came back, why did he seem to be disgruntled during his post interview after coming back from the moon? It's almost it's almost like he witnessed something that scared the hell out of him.
That could be, but I suspect it has to do with the fact that he was second fiddle. Even though he was the first man on the moon, he was really second fiddle. And he agreed to take a background role in the whole Apollo mythology that was created. So I think, clearly Buzz was the main guy. That's why all the pictures are of Buzz. Buzz performed the Masonic ceremony. The Freemasons had a lot of control over NASA. People didn't know that. I don't think Neil Armstrong liked that very much, but he agreed to go along with it to serve his country, and I think that's primarily what it is. That's just my suspicion. It's that over, the aliens scared the hell out of this. Now, I will say that report that they, on a private comm channel that they radioed back and said, these babies are huge, they're on the rim of the crater and all that stuff. I will say that I have a friend, I have two friends that worked at NASA at that time, and they both say that story was spreading like wildfire within 30 minutes of Apollo 11 landing. And that gives it a lot of credence in my mind, but there's just no proof of it because nobody's ever come up with a recording or anything. So,
and and when you bring that up, Mike, it kind of brings me. Of course, surely you've seen the Transformers, The Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah,
and when they landed on the moon, they did their little PR stunt, and did the flag and blah blah blah, and then they went off script. They went off communications, and they went to seek down this alien spacecraft. Now, it's almost like Hollywood knows a little too much, and somebody's definitely trickling down information. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, no, but something happened, and it seems like Hollywood is in the know.
Well, again, here's Buzz Aldrin making a movie where he basically calls himself, all of NASA, and all the other astronauts liars. Okay? Is that really something you're going to do if there's no truth to it? I mean, I don't think so. It's the same thing with John Glenn's appearance on Frasier in 2003, where he said, we lied to you. We all lied to you. I mean, really, NASA made John Glenn an American hero, and then he goes on the most popular show on television at the time and tells everybody that he and they lied to the American people, and what they saw in space terrified them. Wow, I can't imagine somebody handing me that script if I'm John Glenn and me going, oh, okay, that'll be funny. It's not funny. And again, Buzz doing it basically, yeah. You don't even have to read between the lines. You basically just have to look at what they do. I mean, again, pay attention to what they do, not what they say. And both Buzz Aldrin and John Glenn have flat out said, in fictional settings, quote unquote, what really happened with Apollo.
Do you think that Kennedy somehow knew that there were leftover ruins on the moon, and that's possibly what made him want to go to the moon in first place?
Yeah, because what happened was, and I talk about this in Hidden Agenda and some more in Ancient Aliens and JFK, he got into office, he declared war on the deep state, he tried to find out what we knew about aliens and UFOs. He got stonewalled because they weren't going to let this guy have his hands on that technology. And so he said, okay, screw you. I'm going to go around you. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a public space program. The whole country is going to go to the moon, and we're going to go and get this technology because they knew it was there. Mm-hmm. We're going to go get this alien technology and bring it back, and we're going to reverse engineer it ourselves for the good guys, the public space program. So there was a hidden agenda within NASA, which was that they were supposed to be the public but secret space program. And then on top of that, the biggest FU was, I'm not only going to do that, I'm going to share everything with the Russians. He was begging them to blow his head off. And 10 days after he signed the executive orders, the security action memos to put everything into motion, they shot him, killed him in Dallas.
And my thing is, everything you just stated, I believe is probably 100% correct. It's if it's not, it's close to it. And so my thing is, Mike, how do we know those ruins were on the moon? Is that part of the SSP program that, I don't know, that dated back maybe, I don't know, the 40s and 50s or before the Apollo missions? Like, we already had intel.
Yeah, I think it's possibly that. Certainly, again, with his involvement, and boy, Q is making a whole shit ton of drops here, which keeps interrupting my cell phone here as we do this. Hi, Q, how's it going? So yeah, I think they clearly had some intel ahead of time, and whether it was through secret space program technology, whether they were old ancient scrolls and texts that told them, which a lot of the secret societies possessed, that told them what was on the moon, that the gods had come from the moon, or they lived on the moon for a while. Blah,
Who's
blah,
to
blah.
say that some of these societies, I guess you could whatever figure name or whatever name you want to call them, who's to say they don't have scripts and books and texts from the ancient library of Alexandria?
What did the Templars find in the Temple Mount, and what did those documents say that they took? So who knows where they got the information from? But I think it's pretty safe to assume that they did get that information. It's just a question of, of where, and we don't really have that right now. But I think we can surmise that it was available to them.
Do you think that we currently have people living on the moon now, possibly a part of Project Horizon?
It's possible. Wait a minute. Before we go to that question, I want to make one more point about the last
Go
question,
ahead, Mike.
Which is that, NASA commissioned the Brookings report, the Brookings study, which was the basis for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And they specifically addressed the question of whether you will find artifacts on other planets. And they basically said, yeah, you will. You're almost certainly going to. So the thinking in 1958 and 1969 and 1960 was that you were going to find leftover alien technology. So that's another thing that reinforces it. The fact that NASA's own publications were discussing that probability as a probability, I think, is really important. Now, do we have people on the moon today? Project Horizon, extension of that. Project Horizon is very primitive. It involved, a lot of stuff being shot to the moon with chemical rockets. If we do have something there, I think it's a lot more sophisticated than could be put together with chemical rockets. But I just got to say, I don't know. They're not going to take pictures of their own secret space program bases. They never have. Mm-hmm. And everything I've seen in the photographs I've looked at is in ruins and it's ancient. So I don't know. But I mean, it seems logical, but there's no proof of it. And anybody who tells you they have proof of it is not telling you the truth.
Exactly. And so let's go to some of these. I've touched a little bit on your newest book, and then in some of your other books as well. So let's kind of, I guess, I want to touch on some of your other books because you talk about many things and they connect together really good, Mike. Which I haven't read all of them, every one of them through and through. but I have followed your work for quite some time, read your articles, have watched your interviews. So I have a really good knowledge base when it comes to what you're talking about in this puzzle that you're putting together. But let's go ahead and move forward to, I guess, to the moon. Like, well, we've been talking about the moon, but these things that you've been talking about for quite some time, these structures. Now, is there a pyramid, some type of artificial pyramid on the moon?
Yeah, there's at least one. I mean, there's this thing called the ziggurat, or I call it the ziggurat on the dark side of the moon, or the back side of the moon. I like, there's no dark side of the moon because the whole planet, the whole thing is illuminated at some point. But the dark side of the moon is just so much cooler than saying back side of the moon. And it's near the crater Cleomedes, not Cleomedes, but Daedalus R. And it's interesting because it's something that appears in photographs, first generation print photographs that a guy had from his grandfather or his father's collection of photos that used to work at NASA. But then now it's whitewashed out of the more modern digital scans. So that tells you that they're altering the database to try to alter reality, alter what's there. But yeah, I mean, I've looked at it. I've gone through that case over and over again. We've gone into excruciating detail. And to my mind, there's no question that thing exists, and it's definitely a pyramid of some kind.
Now, what about these glass buildings on the moon? Because you talked about that.
Yeah,
you've been talking about that for years now, and Richard Hoagland has too. But maybe
that's Hoagland's initial theory. Yeah,
there might be some out there that are followers of mine that may not know what the hell are you talking about. Glass buildings, these structures on the moon. Right. Now, elaborate a little bit about that to those people that may not know what you're talking about.
Well, you have these towering. I mean, some of them are 20 miles high, crystalline towers over the surface of the moon in certain areas. And they seem to primarily correspond with the dark areas of the moon, what they call the mare, as opposed to the light areas. And the theory is that they're made of glass, lunar glass, which would be theoretically stronger or as strong as steel, maybe a little bit stronger, because it wouldn't have any moisture in it. So it would be a perfect thing to build a meteor shield out of. And the theory came from taking old photographs of the moon, analog photographs, getting prints, first generation prints right off the negatives from the Apollo archives, and several archives all over the world, Hawaii, Houston, Bethesda, Maryland. And all they did was they simply, because they could see specks of light and stuff in the sky, and they're like, it should be absolutely black, because any stars or planets are going to be so far away and so faint, and the shutter speeds are going to be so fast, that the sky should be absolute black, but it's not. There's stuff there. And when they enhanced that, overexposed it, you saw these structures, and they had very specific right angular types of engineering supports, and they would follow the circumference or the terrain, the circular, the spherical nature of the lunar surface. So they were all aligned with local vertical, not camera vertical. So they weren't scratches. The analog stuff shows that very clearly. And then lots of other ways that this stuff was confirmed. There's a lot of other shots where you see these little funny rainbow type things, which are these multicolored flashes of light in the sky over the astronauts. And that is where basically the sunlight is hitting these glass panes, and it's refracting and reflecting and bending and acting just like a prism. And the final proof of that is that if you take photographs of the lunar surface where everything is flat and gray looking, and you enhance the color, the saturation, you just turn up the volume on the color a little bit, it's all multicolored. I mean, it's incredibly beautiful. It's purple, it's pink, it's blue, it's green, it's lavender, it's all these different shades, which is exactly what would happen if these structures were overhead. You would have this multicolored look. And there's also optical telescope photographs now that people are taking with amateur stuff, that you take it again and just tweak the color a little bit, and it's all multicolored. And I think the final proof, which is probably the best one, which is Alan Bean, who was an Apollo 12 astronaut, walked on the surface of the moon, fourth man to walk on the moon on Apollo 12. When he came back, he became an artist. He started painting self-portraits of what he saw on the moon and of himself on the moon. And it's funny because he started out with it being really bland and gray like you saw on National Geographic. And then he wasn't happy with that, and he kept changing it until finally he painted all these multicolored lights all over the surface exactly as he remembered the surface. So I think those things are all proofs that this stuff exists. And there's also a great shot from Apollo 15 where they're looking back at the moon after they've gone on trans-Earth injection. And you can see this cloudy haze over the surface of the moon. And when it should be absolutely sharp. So there's only two things that could be. It's either these glass structures or it's an atmosphere.
That's what John Lear believes. That's what John Lear believes.
Yeah, I think he's wrong about that.
Yeah.
But either way, they have lied to us about what the moon really is. I got to let this cat out. Hey,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Ask me the next question. I'll answer it.
All right. Now, I heard you mention in your New Living Expo lecture, which is, I'm going to give the link to that in the description for everybody to check it out. It's a phenomenal lecture. But I heard you mention in the New Living Expo lecture that the Nazis, and we touched a little bit about this already, but that the Nazis got their technology from ETs, and that's what helped create the Nazi UFO. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that, Mike? And if that is true, where and when did the Nazis, I guess, meet with the aliens to retrieve this type of technology?
Well, nobody knows the specifics of that. But
yes, we're just, of course.
There is an interview with a man named Hermann Oberth, who was the head of the Nazi rocketry programs. He was Wernher von Braun's mentor, and he basically put him through school, sponsored his dissertation, got von Braun. And of course, for those who don't know, Wernher von Braun was the head of the American rocket program. He basically designed all of the rockets that got us to the moon and back. And Oberth, when he was asked in an interview in the 1960s, how were the Germans so advanced? You guys were so advanced. You were so far ahead of the Americans and everybody else. How did you achieve these incredible technologies, the jet engine and the rocket? And of course, we now know about the Nazi Bell and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he said, we had help. And the interviewer said, well, who'd you have help from? And he said, the people of other worlds. Now, there's an interesting story I got to add to that, which is that at Alien Con, which took place in Pasadena back in June, and it was for the Ancient Aliens show. It was a wonderful experience. I was having dinner with Linda Moulton Howe and Eric Von Daniken, and I think Nick Pope joined us. And Eric was talking, and I was kind of asking him the questions you always ask. Eric, what got you really interested in a lot of this stuff? He goes, well, I was always kind of interested in this Ancient Aliens thing, but he goes, I used to manage a hotel. And I said, yeah, we know that. That's Eric's background. He used to be a hotel manager in Switzerland. And he said, we had this guest this one time, and his name was Hermann Oberth. I was like, oh,
there we go.
Okay. And I said, well, what did you talk about? And he said, well, we talked about this stuff. And I asked him if that interview was correct, if that he had really meant that they had gotten help from aliens. And Hermann Oberth, he says, looked him right in the eye and said, yes, absolutely. We had contacts with aliens from other planets, and they gave us this technology. Now, there are some stories that I put in Hidden Agenda, not Ancient Aliens and JFK, but the previous book, where the Thule Society and the Vril Society, which were these weird German occult, the Germans didn't have these walls between the occult and the scientific like we do in the Western world or the States. They were all willing to try anything. But the Vril Society, which is led by a woman named Maria Orsich, a beautiful blonde Aryan woman, they would do seances, and she supposedly channeled aliens from Aldebaran. And according to their own claims, that's where they got information from. They got technical information downloaded through these witches, I guess you could call them. And that may have been the means of communication. So the idea that the Germans necessarily met directly with aliens is not necessarily the only way to do it. I mean, but here's the thing. If they got the ideas from some other source and the technology worked, I guess you can say that there might be something to this whole channeling thing. After all, I don't know.
And when it comes to Aleister Crowley, and you talked about him within your, before, and also in the lecture, he met with I believe he channeled a certain being.
Yeah,
also.
And by the way, if you want to do some comparisons of faces and families,
I was about to ask you that. I was about to ask you that too.
Barbara Bush's father.
So let's go on to that. So, is there any other kind of information that might lead to that? Of course, we know there's a lot of evil in that family bloodline. But I guess what was the chain of events to kind of leads you to that? Of course, the photo
Well, yeah,
comparison.
other people had pointed out the resemblance before, and then it turns
It
out
is a
that
crazy resemblance.
it is, yeah, she looks like a female Aleister Crowley. And then there's the fact that her mother, whose name escapes me, I can't remember her mom's name, was married to her dad, but it was, they were into all this weird occult stuff, all this weird occult shit that all these people in power are into. And she had taken a vacation, a sabbatical to Europe for several months, if not a year. And she was actually staying with Aleister Crowley 9 months before Barbara was born.
Pauline
and he
Robinson
conducted all kinds of orgies and ritual sex and seances. And suddenly she comes back to the United States, and 9 months after her return, she has Barbara. So you figure it
Pauline
out.
Robinson, is that it?
Maybe,
Pauline,
yeah,
I think, yeah. You talking about? We're talking about Barbara Bush's mother, right?
Mother,
yeah,
right.
Pauline Robinson.
So she was, Crowley nailed her. He knocked her up, and she came back and had Barbara, and then she was matched with the Prescott Bush family. So,
oh man! So, do you think there's any connection with the Vannevar? Is that how you say his name, Bush?
Vannevar Bush? I've never found any, although I think it's suspicious, but I've never found any. And the biggest connection with him is that he was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, just like Buzz Aldrin, just like so many of the other NASA people and astronauts. James Webb, who was the director of NASA under Kennedy. So there's that whole Masonic influence on science and technology and space travel, because I think the Masons believed that Isis and Osiris and Horus and Seth were these ancient Egyptian gods, were their real gods, and they were all descended from them. We're descended from extraterrestrials, and we're going to go back and see what gifts they left us on the moon, kind of a thing. So
what's your take on the MJ-12? Legit or not?
Yeah, I think it's legit. I don't get people who claim it's not. There's people who claim the documents have been discounted. I think I read somebody who I used to respect
Stanton Friedman
say something
does
about that the other day, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, look at the work Stanton Friedman did on the MJ-12 documents, and there's all sorts of supporting documents that have been pulled out of the archives, and basically the only alternative people have is to say that Friedman and everybody else is lying, which doesn't make, I don't think they are. I've never known any of them to lie about anything. And, they've been analyzed by Dr. Bob Wood, who is, is a brilliant guy, physicist, engineer, who has documents expert who studied them all. And he says they're all legit. They're all from the right time period. The ink is correct. The paper's correct. All this stuff. Well, not the paper, because the original MJ-12 documents are not, they're printouts off microfilm. But, yeah, I think there's no question they're legitimate.
So, within the next probably 10 to 15 minutes, let's move on just a little bit more. Antarctica. Okay. What the hell is going on with Antarctica, Mike? Because there's a lot of big interest over the past couple of years with that icy continent down there.
Well, it's exciting. It's interesting. There is what looks like a pyramid there, but it's part of a mountain chain. So I'm suspicious it could be a mountain, not a pyramid. But I think the thing is that it doesn't, there's a lot of stories about Antarctica, right? There's a lot of people saying they found this, they found that, I've been down there, blah, blah, blah. Nobody has any proof, but what is really weird is all the people that have gone there and recently gone there. And why did Buzz Aldrin go there? Why did Buzz Aldrin have a heart attack when he got there? Maybe it's just that he's in his 80s and he had a heart attack. Maybe there's something else to it. There's these claims that he tweeted out, I saw the face of evil and it does exist or something, but again, that's not proven. So who knows? But I was all fine with that until, I was like going to write Antarctica off as just being some crazy secret space program, Gaia television bullshit.
Yeah.
And then John Kerry, the Secretary of State, went down there on Election Day, 2016. And I'm thinking to myself, what the F is the U.S. Secretary of State doing in Antarctica on Election Day? I mean, I realize there's such a thing as absentee ballots, but what is he doing there? And it makes no sense. It's like the Chewbacca defense in South Park. It makes no sense. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what he was doing there. It leads me to believe there's something going on. There's the old stories that I talk about in Hidden Agenda about New Schwabenland and the German bases there, and Operation High Jump, which was basically a double pincer move attack on the German bases, and whether there were German flying saucers there. I don't know, but I think there's something more to Antarctica. That's all I can say. I agree with the fact that there's something more to what's in Antarctica than we've been told.
Do you think that the true purpose with the Nazis going down there to Antarctica was to find the entrance of the inner Earth while they were down there?
They were looking for stuff like that, so that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they were looking for stuff like that. They were looking for mystery entrances to the underworld in India and things like that. So they were into that. So I can see that being a probability, but again, right now they're just stories. I mean, Joseph Farrell has done a lot of work on this stuff, and I'd recommend his books, Right to the Black Song and Brotherhood of the Bell, and some of the other books he's written. But I don't feel like there's enough proof to conclude that. Although that's the way I'm leaning. There's a lot of things I have opinions on that I'm leaning toward, as opposed to I'm rock solid. That's true. Like, I'm rock solid that JFK Jr. is Vincent Fusca and he's not dead. And that Carolyn Bessette Kennedy is not dead. I'm now rock solid on that. The rest of it, I don't.
Now, why does it seem to be so many mysterious and strange deaths when it comes to the Kennedys? Okay, you have JFK, you have RFK, you have JFK's brother in World War II, but that's probably no strange coincidence with that one.
Yeah, that was pretty risky. I mean, he was on a really risky mission, and he was trying to become a war hero so he could run for president. And when he was killed, it all fell to John. What
about the other ones, though? There's a lot of strange,
There's a lot of questions about RFK's assassinations. And here's the other thing, is that the whole JFK Jr. thing links him to Donald Trump, who, by the way, is our current president. So there's a Trump-Kennedy connection. And it's really interesting that RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is working very closely with Donald Trump and praising him, which you would not expect a liberal Kennedy to do, yet he's doing that. So what is that connection? That would be JFK Jr.'s uncle, cousin. So what's that all about? There's something going on. I don't know that we're at the bottom of it yet. I do hear that things are going to start getting really weird. Now, there was a book I wrote in 2010 where I said, as the physics accelerates and our consciousness arises and we start waking up to shit, things are going to get really weird. And I just think we're in that weird period of time.
What do you see for taking that, I guess, in the not so distant future? Now, of course, there's a lot of things against Trump right now. But do you think do you think he will release anything about, I don't know, possibly with more JFK files, with the secret space program, with Q? What the hell is going to happen? I guess within the next few months or the next couple years down the road, Mike?
Well, I think the Space Force, Trump Force One, this Trump Space Force thing, is a cover or an excuse for them to start breaking out technologies that we've actually had for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and start bringing them into the mainstream. And that's going to lead to more space exploration. So I think that's going to happen. I'm very concerned about November of this year. I hear a lot of things about November. And one of the things that's going on is the current financial structure of the world is very messed up. And it cannot really be fixed. It has to be blown up and replaced. So I hear things about November, financial collapses or engineered collapses to push us into something new and better. I'm not predicting that specifically, but I think it's a possibility from things that I hear from people. So, and part of that will be that there will be this unveiling. Remember, we're in the apocalypse. The word apocalypse does not mean cataclysm, destruction, physical destruction. It means to lift the veil. So the veil is lifting. And it would not shock me at all if one day on TV, there's a speech from the Oval Office and John F. Kennedy Jr. sits down and says, "I'm not dead." guess what we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years, planning. So I think we're going to have an exciting next 6 or 8 months. I really do.
So you think it's very possible that he faked his death?
Yeah, to avoid being killed and murdered by the Clintons. I think they wanted the Clintons to think he was dead.
What if he's Q?
Now.
What if he's Q? What if he's Q?
And the possibility that I've raised and other people have raised that he's actually Q. I mean, there is this video out there, folks, if you haven't seen it. It's called Q, The Plan to Save the World. And many of the things in it that are called a conspiracy theory, like Pizzagate and these worldwide satanic rings and pedophilia and stuff, they appear to be coming true. I mean, there's more and more of this stuff revealed all the time. They just arrested 300 Catholic priests in Pennsylvania, a statewide network of pedophiles. Yeah. So these things are happening. But anyway, this video outlines the plan to save the world. And a lot of people say the voice sounds like John F. Kennedy Jr. And I think it does resemble his voice. So I would like to call on somebody to do a voice analysis and see if they can match. Is it the same guy 20 years later? I don't know, but that would be a really interesting experiment to do. And if that's the case, if he's the narrator of the Q video, then the possibility that he is Q, I think, goes up exponentially.
Man.
So that's a non-answer to your answer, but
yeah.
Question.
So I guess to kind of round things up for this time, I meant to ask you this earlier. I guess when we were talking about, I don't know, Aleister Crowley, but it's really nothing to do with Aleister Crowley, but explain the movie Rosemary's Baby and the birth of the Antichrist. Because when you talked about, when you just, and this is where we're going to leave off, so just take your time with it. Now, when you explain this during your lecture, I was like, what the fuck? You know, yeah. I'm like...
It's weird when you get woke, you know, you start noticing things. And this is something I noticed years ago.
I thought, you know, it amazes me how little I actually know, you know.
Well, just be like me. Just start paying attention to stuff. Look, here's the thing. The only thing I do that leads me to a lot of this stuff, the thing that I do that most people I think don't do, is when I see something, my instincts tell me that this factoid is important. I don't know why, maybe, but I never forget it. I stick it back in my brain and I say, okay, that's important. I don't know why, how it connects right now. Keep it in mind. And then 2 or 3 years later, something will happen. And it's like, oh, that's why that's important, because this connects to this, connects to this. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing to do, is just never put anything out of your mind. Never dismiss anything. Take it, put it in a box, stick it on a shelf, and hold it there for later, because it might be important. And that's how you can connect all these dots. But the film Rosemary's Baby is essentially a reenactment of something called the Babylon Working out in Pasadena, California, conducted by Jack Parsons, for which there's a TV show on right now about Jack Parsons called Strange Angel. It's on CBS All Access. I have no financial investment in it, but I'm telling you about it. It's not great, but it's okay. He was a cult-worshipping, devil-worshipping rocket scientist who basically helped invent the solid rocket motor and had a major role to play in us getting to the moon, and was a follower of Aleister Crowley. He was involved in a temple in Pasadena that was part of Crowley's network. And in the Babylon Working, he and another member of the cult named L. Ron Hubbard, who you may have heard of, were working together with this redheaded woman named Marjorie Cameron, who had very short red cropped hair. And basically, he was having sex with her, doing all these weird occult sex rituals to try to get her pregnant, to create the whore of Babylon, he would then subsequently also impregnate, who would then give birth to the Antichrist. That was the plan, right? And the Antichrist would then destroy the world, which is what Parsons wanted because he was nuts. So that was the plan. Now, if you look at the film Rosemary's Baby, it is flat out a reenactment of the Babylon Working, reset from a location in Pasadena to New York City. But John Cassavetes plays basically the Jack Parsons role. He looks exactly like him. Mia Farrow plays the oh my God, what's her name? Why is her name slipping my mind? The Marjorie Cameron role, and related to James Cameron, I'm not sure, but possibly. So she looks exactly like Marjorie Cameron. There's another guy who looks exactly like L. Ron Hubbard. He even has the little, what do they call it? The little ascot, scarf that he wears.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
another guy who looks exactly like Aleister Crowley, who plays the Crowley role. And there's all these other sub characters, and it's basically the plot of The Babylon Working is the plot of Rosemary's Baby, which was made, some 20 or 30 years later by Roman Polanski, who is a known and established pedophile and Satanist, who's into all this stuff. Directed by Roman Polanski. So that's essentially what it is. And the really bizarre part is that there was this one part of the film where Mia Farrow's wearing this red dress with this white lace pattern around the neck. And when Prince, who's the one who's going to be king? William? When Prince William and his wife presented their new baby last summer, a year ago or so, or six or 9 months ago, his wife had cut her hair and was wearing the exact same dress as they presented the baby. So they were saying, Rosemary's Baby, what are they telling us? This is the Antichrist? Is that what they're telling us? I don't know. But this connects. It all makes a certain amount of sense. And it's all connected ultimately to aliens and space programs. And that's the part that's really cool.
Well, that's a good way to leave off, Mike. But I have a ton of other questions I got to ask you, and then we're going to save that for other discussions down the road, because I do like to keep my interviews between 45 minutes to an hour, 15 minutes, just because people have a life. And now, of course, some people were like, "Man, let's go on for 6 hours." Yeah, and I salute you guys, I really do. But anyways, Mike, and I tell this to everybody. I salute you for your service for humanity.
Thank you.
And it was a treat, an honor, and a privilege. And I look forward to having you on somewhere in the near future, man.
Sounds good, Michael. Thanks a lot.